Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the UKTC 1K Leicester tournament. So a few facts about the tournament: it had 95 players, which means that it was, to my knowledge at least, one of the biggest tournaments we've seen in Shadow of the Galaxy. It is like if you compare this to the 1K tournament that usually happens in the US, they usually gather around 30 players along those lines, like 30, 32 players, sometimes less, sometimes a bit more. This is way above that in terms of numbers of players. I mean, granted, £1,000, because it was in pounds, is more money than $1,000. But even so, I feel like maybe the geography of Europe make it so it's more densely populated. It's easier to gather a lot of players for a tournament. And I'm really glad that UKTC took the initiative to organize a relatively high prize pool tournament in Europe, because I feel like this is what we needed. We have definitely the density of players in compared to the US, where players are a bit more scattered. In Europe, I feel like players are a bit more regrouped in the western part of Europe, where there are a lot of big cities that are not far from each other, like Paris, London, Berlin, like Frankfurt, like all those big places where there's going to be a lot of Star Wars Unlimited players. So I'm really glad that an organization took the initiative to set up those tournaments with big prize pools. And in my opinion, it's been a big success. This tournament had 7 rounds of Swiss with no top cuts. So for their first tournament, UKTC decided to go for a very simple structure. Best of 3, 7 rounds, no top cut. The problem with top cut, right? You got your quarterfinal, your semifinal, your final. It is effectively three extra rounds that only concern 8 players. So they really extend the duration of the event for only a small handful of players. So in my opinion, top cuts are worth it if you're going to go do a tournament over 2 days, which is what's going to be in Manchester next week. But if you're going to go for a 1-day tournament, I don't think it is worth it to add a top cut. So I definitely agree with them on this decision, even though it does make the event a little bit less epic. If you do this over a tournament over 2 days, then you can create like a side event and other tournaments to go alongside the top cuts. So then players who didn't make it to the top cuts still have something they can play. Next, it is the first tournament organized by UKTC, and hopefully there's going to be many more to come. I was the one casting the tournaments. I've been casting every single featured game, every single rounds on my channel. I hope so. The replay of the event is on my YouTube in the direct category. So if you want to see the games, please check it out. But today, of course, we're going to go into the analysis of the tournament and how it went. So, as you can see here, this is the metagame breakdown. And as you can see, the new Han Worth the Risk, was the most played leader in the tournament, with 13.68% of the meta, which comes to me as a surprise, because even though I believe Han Blue is a very strong deck, I didn't feel like it was one of the top decks. In my opinion, the 3 best decks in the meta are Boba Yellow, Sabine Green, and Kira Green. Those are, like, in my opinion, the 3 best decks. So was not expecting to see Han Solo Worth the Risk being that well represented. Also, it had there's 2 decks though. Obviously, the meta game breakdown does not tell the entire story, since obviously there are multiple different Han Solo decks that are very different from one another. I would say the 3 most popular. The first one is the Han Solo Blue, the mid-range / a bit control-y version. The Han Green, which is the Swarm deck. And finally the new Han Green, but with ramp, which was very popular at the beginning of Shadow of the Galaxy, but kind of fell into popularity a lot recently. So I believe those were kind of the 3 most. So obviously this within that percentage there's different decks that are involved. Then the rest of another interesting factor is the fact that I feel like Kira has been widely underrepresented, only 6.32% of the meta. So only 6 people bringing Kira, which I believe to be the best control mid-range deck in the game at the moment. And the interesting thing is like there's no Krennic, so it's not even like sometimes you don't see as many Kiras just because it's kind of like a lot of people decided to bring Krennic, so it was kind of like a 50% Kira, 50% Krennic. But in this case, there's not even a single Krennic player in the tournament, which makes it even more surprising that Kira has seen so little play. I mean, it's still in the top 5 most played, top 6 most played deck in the set, and if actually it's tied with Rey and Han Solo. But still, I feel like it was a little bit surprising that only 6 people brought Kira. Then I feel like Rey is overrepresented. So Rey was pretty popular, and I was actually one of the advocates of Rey at the beginning of the meta. I'm actually one of the person who showed a deck list of Rey Red, I think one of the earliest to show a version of the deck on my channel. And I have to admit that I don't see any good reason to play Rey Red compared to play an Han Solo Blue. I think Han Solo Blue is better than Rey because one of the biggest weakness of Blue White is like it's very slow, it's very fair, and Han Solo allows you to basically cheat that system by playing unit faster at the cost of a bit of damage on the unit, but most blue-white units have a lot of health, so dealing 2 damage to them is not really that big of a deal, and allow them to play them on curve a bit more aggressively is very worth it. So the new Han has basically fixed the biggest weakness of that color combination, and for that reason, I don't really see any good reason to play Rey anymore. I mean, obviously Rey makes 4th throw a little bit easier to use. The heal 3 is very good, but I don't think all those advantages make up for how powerful Han is. So I think she's a bit overrepresented. I don't think she deserves to be the 4th/6th most played deck in this meta, even though there are other decks that are not Rey Red, that are basically Rey Green, which I think can be a little bit worth it, which are, in my opinion, quite good decks and deserve some attention. A good showing for Tarkin. Tarkin, 5.26% of the meta. Tarkin Yellow is still a good deck in my opinion. Can still do quite well, so it was good to see Tarkin. I'm happy to see Tarkin Yellow seeing play because I think this is one of the very few decks in the meta which is truly different from things we've seen before. Most of the decks that this is probably one of my biggest criticism of this meta is like most of the decks that we're seeing are basically just upgraded version of deck that existed in Spark of Rebellion. So despite almost double the card pool, basically the card pool has effectively doubled in size, and yet we haven't seen we haven't seen really any new archetypes really managing to get through the meta. Most of the deck you're gonna see are just upgraded version of existing deck, and I think that's a little bit disappointing. And Tarkin is one of the exceptions. Tarkin Yellow is really truly different deck than anything we've seen in Spark of Rebellion, even though it is a leader that was already there in in set 1. So I'm glad that it's doing well. No Krennic, which comes a little bit of a surprise to me because Krennic has done very good results in Gen Con. So I was expecting to see a few Krennics. With all that being said, I do believe that in the current meta, Kira is better than Krennic, and I'll get into more details on why that's the reason later on. And that's it for the metagame breakdown. So other than this, we got, of course, a bunch of... So Bosk is a good deck, so I'm not super surprised to see it well represented. I think Bosk is, in my opinion, the top 3 best leader. If I had to rank the leaders of Shadow of the Galaxy now, I would say the new Han is the best, Kira seconds, and Bosk third. So I'm not surprised to see Bosk doing well as well. I mean, being represented, and then a bunch of random decks, as it's usually the case. Overall, decent diversity, I would say. And this is what the top 16 looks like. So as you can see, we got in the top 16, so 1 Kira deck, 3 Sabines, 3 Sabine green specifically, 3 hand blue, 1 hand green, 1 old hand green, 3 boba yellows, and 1 Bosque green, 1 Palpatine green, and 1 Tarkin yellow. So overall, I really did the math, and this is very proportionate to the representations. The most played deck in the meta, I ended up having 4 represented in the top 16, even though out of those 4 represented, 3 of them were out of the top 8. So no new hand blue deck in the top 8, but 3 of them in the top 16, which I think is a pretty good performance. So if you're not saying hand blue in the top 8, this is not representative of the success of the deck. The deck has been quite successful with 3 hand blues in top 16. The rest is proportionate. We got 3 boba yellow, since it's the second most played deck. 3 Sabine green, also the most. Kira green, only 1 represented, which is a pretty average performance if you take into account the fact that it has 6 Kira players. Only 1 made it out of the top 16, but it won the entire event, and it was the only undefeated deck. So to me, the fact that we don't see a lot of Kira in the top 16 is probably due to the fact that there were just not that many Kira green in the tournament as a whole. And I believe would have been more Kira, we would have seen more in the top 16. Palpatine green confirming to be a force to be reckoned with, even though it has an Achilles heel against aggro. We'll go into more details about that. Against aggro, we saw Kotul making it to the final of the Take the Initiative tournament with this Palpatine green, and losing unsurprisingly to Sabine green. Even though the deck has had a lot of upgrades to fight aggro recently. And we also see a Ray green in the top 16. I believe Ray green is probably, if you want to be playing Ray, I believe that Ray blue or Ray green is probably the way to go. As I said, Ray red, you're just going to end up with a worse version of hand blue, in my opinion. No deck has overperformed in regards to the top 16 results, in my opinion. I don't feel like any deck that has been doing performance that were out of the ordinary. Every deck is kind of like represented in the top 16, proportionate to how much it was represented in the tournament as a whole. And no out of meta deck really made a particularly big performance in this tournament. We had a hand green deck also going a top 8, which we'll go over during our next part of the video, which is going to be the deck by deck analysis. And first, we're going to start with Luke Foster, who came out 8th, and we saw in the feature match area a couple of times with his Boba Yellow deck. So overall, his deck is relatively standard. I see a couple of things that are surprising me a little bit. He prefers to play Hotshot DL44 Blasters over Surprise Strike. I personally prefer Surprise Strike mostly because it's capable of boosting both space units and ground units, and obviously Boba Yellow is a deck that has a lot of space units and is trying to play on both aspects to really make things work. But Archon 44, of course, can be played from the resource pile, makes it a lot easier, so it doesn't need to be kept in hand at all time, which is nice. Overall, the version is relatively classic. We see Mercenary Gunship as the turn 1 space unit being played by Luke in this case. Mercenary Gunship can be a little bit tricky because what happens is that you use this to put early pressure on your opponent, but then if you're not trading away your gunship, what happens is that then your opponent can steal it away, and that's actually a pretty big deal, especially whenever you want to play Cunning. It gives your opponent more options for countering your Cunning because you can now steal the control of your gunship and stuff like that. So haven't been a big fan of gunship in this of mercenary gunship in Boba Yellow, but it is I think Counter Spacer is only, I think Counter Spacer has more upsides overall in my opinion, even though it is a little bit less aggressive. 3 copies of Relentless Pursuit, that's more than what you usually expect, especially as he plays Relentless Pursuit alongside Waylay. No copies of a New Adventure whatsoever. I personally find New Adventures to be pretty good in this deck. It's just a combo with Fire Spray is just completely absurd, so a bit surprising. We'll see Bosk being played over Syndicate Lackeys. I personally think Syndicate Lackeys is a lot more better positioned than Bosk in the current meta. Really, the full package of 4 LOM and Zuckus. And then Toro, Calican being the 3-drop of choice in this deck. Overall, the deck is fairly classic. Not much to say about it. In the anti, it's a version that I think is mostly good against aggro. The 3 copies of Relentless Pursuit, the Hotshot DR44 blasters. This makes me think that he built this deck to beat Sabine, as he basically doesn't have any anti-control tech in the main deck, no DJ, no Body Rook, no Locking Tie Phantoms in the main deck. But he have them in the sideboard, of course. 3 Body Rook, 3 Locking Tie Phantom in sideboards to beat control. Another surprise to me is no Boba Fett's armor. I found Boba Fett's armor to be incredible against quite a few decks. I think one of the biggest weaknesses of Boba is Kira, and Kira, in my opinion, Kira is nowadays we've seen a lot of players playing Kira and not playing Rival's Fall, which I believe to be a mistake. Notably the version played by who is the person who won day 2 at Gen Con, and also a YouTuber, so check out his channel. This guy does not play Rival's Fall, so I think a lot of other players have followed on his path to not play Rival's Fall, and I think this is a massive opportunity for Boba Fett, because then if you can resolve a Boba Fett's armor on Boba Fett, there's literally nothing the opponent can do, unless he managed to resolve like a Power of the Dark Side, but this can be played around. He's gonna have to kill Boba Fett the hard way, and this can completely take over the game. Even if Kira players decide to put Rival's Fall back in their deck, there's still plenty of matchup where Boba Fett's armor is amazing, notably against all the hand decks, the whole hand deck, so all the deck that don't have access to Rival's Fall, that are a bit mid-rangey. Rival's Fall Boba Fett's armor is amazing. It's really good in the mirror match. So I'm very surprising to see no copies of Boba Fett's armor in the main deck or in the sideboard. Next, we got Sebastian Bukowski and his Sabine Green. I don't think we've seen that one on stream. As you can see, it's pretty much what you would expect, with a couple of interesting choices. Only 2 copies of Podamron is the first surprising choice, because I found Podamron to be extremely good, especially since he's also playing timely interventions. So one of the inconveniences of Poe is that sometimes Poe can feel a little bit slow whenever you don't have access to ECL, which sometimes you are forced to use ECL early on in the game. So I understand the decision of only going down to 2 Poe for that reason, while Wrecker, even if you don't have access to ECL, can still be a good card that comes into play and defeats a resource to get rid of something. But I believe Poe has... but since he's playing Timely Intervention, I would definitely play the 3 package of Poe. But I also think Fighter for Freedom is like very well positioned in the current meta. There's a lot of like Sentinels, like that's like early game Sentinels that Fighter for Freedom is really good against, and you need with Shield as well. So I really like Fighter for Freedom personally. 3 copies of Heroic Sacrifice, I think that's like a lot. Timely Intervention, there's some pros, there's some cons for it. Overall, I think this card has grown in me in this deck. Even though it means that you have less card, you make your Course of Belief a bit weaker, but I think it could be worth it. He plays a full package of Dark Sabers, Bright Hope in the main deck, which is interesting, probably because he thinks Bright Hope is good against aggro and good against Boba, so Bright Hope can be good in that sense. It's a bit more resilient, a bit more defensive, but I can see it work. The sideboard, we see Sundari Peacekeeper really making it now a mainstay in people's sideboards now for Sabine, for the mirror match. Valiant Assault Ship, 1 copy of it. I was a big fan of Valiant Assault Ship, but in the current meta, I don't feel like the card is so good. I don't think people play... I think Valiant Assault Ship really shines against people who play a lot of Space Sentinels. And in the current meta, it doesn't seem like people play that many Space Sentinels. Valiant Assault Ship just ended up being not the thing you would want to see. Very surprised to see Confiscate being played over Fang Fighters. For me, in the Sabine deck, Fang Fighters is always going to be the preferred option over Confiscate, so a bit surprising to see that. Daring Raids can be good against a deck that has a lot of 2 health units, which I currently don't think that's really the case. Then you can of course go the Daring Raid to face for extra damage. And then Spectral Soldiers for a deck that has a lot of Sentinels, makes sense. So yeah, overall the deck is pretty classic. There's a couple of decisions here which I personally disagree with. He also is very big on Rebel Pathfinder here, playing Rebel Pathfinder over what people usually like to play instead is Alliance X-Wing. I can see that. I think it's really good against Crafty Smuggler. So if you expect a lot of unit like this could be Rebel Pathfinder can be a good card. Moving on, we got Lewis Turner in 6th position, also playing Boba Yellow. So this version is plays an interesting set of cards. So it has the Body Rooks in the main deck. I think this is not a bad idea. I think Body Rook, yes, there's some matchup where he's not great, but in matchup which is good, he's absolutely amazing. And I think having some Body Rook will help you in your weak matchup, which is probably the more controlly deck, notably the Kira. So having a card that is helping your bad matchup so drastically makes this card worth it to include. Boba Fett's armor is making it to the deck. The rest of the deck is pretty much what you would expect. Once again, Mercenary Gunship over Card Spacer for the most part. Gamer in Guards to have extra 4-drops against aggro. Since he's playing Body Rook, he can afford. And once again, a new Adventurer's not making it to the deck. Probably deemed as too situational. Matthew Conway with his hand green, definitely quite different from the hand green we've been used to, since this version, as you can see, is not playing Resupply. So basically the way I'm looking at this list is that it seems to me to be very similar so basically kind of the consensus is that the hand green is more controlly, more rampy, and basically trying to outvalue, trying to outgrow the opponent by overwhelm him with Ewing Reinforcement, Home 1, stuff like this. And the hand yellow the hold hand yellow is more like the tempo deck that is trying to play a 3-drop on turn 1, surprise strike you, then disturb you with Kira, DJ, Tech. I mean, even though of course the green version can also do that, but and play Cunning for like a lot of damage and also bounce you with Cunning Bouncer. So obviously the double yellow version is a lot more tempo focus. And what is very interesting with Matthew's deck is that he decided to go for a tempo deck, but instead of, because he's playing a tempo deck, he's playing Sneak Attack, he's playing Surprise Strike, Outshot DF-44 Blasters, the full package of Fleet Lieutenants, Wing Leaders with a lot of Rebels, even though he still doesn't have that many Rebels. So I feel like his Wing Leaders and Fleet Lieutenants are going to be quite inconsistent because, as I said, he has, of course, C-3PO, R2-D2 as Rebels, but then if he doesn't draw them, the rest of the deck is underworld for the most part. So he has an Ezra, I guess, but yeah, outside of those 9 cards here, Ezra, R2-D2, C-3PO, then other than this, it basically doesn't have any Rebels. So definitely some consistency thing here, which I think he's playing a very dangerous game here with this package. I can see the deck being very strong if everything fall into pieces, but then if he doesn't draw the right card at the right moment, that could be very bad. Sneak Attack, Fleet Lieutenants combo. You can also go Sneak Attack, Home 1, Fleet Lieutenant combo. You can do some stuff like this. It's a very high rolly deck. It has a lot of a card that are not really good by themselves, but if they are combined with one another can become very powerful. So same with DJ Tech, even though Tech has proven to be just a straight up great card just by itself. And then it has so it's a very greedy version of Han Solo, so I see it personally. It doesn't play Resupply, which in my opinion is one of the best card of hand green, because it decides to be a bit more aggressive. It doesn't want to spend an entire turn, but from my experience, you end up being sometimes even more aggressive by being able to play a Resupply turn 2, by being able to play a Ewing Reinforcements on turn 3, than not playing Resupply. But seems to be worked very well for him. He had the 5th place. very little disruption, as you can see. He's not playing Spark of Rebellion, he's not playing Kira. So he's really playing an aggressive version of the hand green deck, which I think is a good idea. Is it better than playing a double yellow and have access to cards like Cunning? That remains to be seen, but it is definitely an interesting version. The only thing I'm not super convinced about is the Rebel package, which I found to be so incredibly inconsistent with the way I see it here. But yeah, it's definitely a very interesting take on the deck. It's definitely something different from what we've seen, even though on the surface it looks very similar to a regular hand green. When you look into the details, you realize it's actually quite different from anything we've seen before. If you guys wonder why people are playing Waylay over Spare the Target, is because Waylay you can bounce your own unit, and that is very relevant to get rid of the bounties. And right now, Spare the Targets, there's relatively few units in the meta that have a native bounty. Basically, Dr. Evazan doesn't see any play, so the upside of Spare the Targets are very small, while the upside of Waylays are more relevant, generally speaking. Next, we got Matt Guiver, who basically went with his Bosk Green, and Matt Guiver, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Anyway, fourth position here with his Bosk Green deck, which on the surface looks like a regular Bosk ramp deck, but it is quite different from the Bosk ramp deck I've personally been playing, and I've seen roaming around. It doesn't play resupply, just relies on press on your head and super the technician to to ramp. And I think one of the major innovation of this deck is that, as you can see, he's not really playing any real turn 1 play. He doesn't have any 2-drops, so basically no short troopers, nothing. Just his turn 1 plays are going to be putting bounties on your units, and I think it's a very smart decision, because I'll explain why. Whenever you are playing a ramp deck, a Bosk ramp, you kind of have to make a choice between, if you start playing a lot of bounties and a lot of 2-drops, then you are really lowering your curve a lot, and then it becomes harder to fit all the late game units that you want to really take advantage of that ramp. In this deck, he decided to go, I'm just gonna skip turn 1 and completely and just focus on the bounties. That's why he's playing Deathmark, which in my opinion is very strong in Bosk. The true extra draw in late game can be very powerful, especially when you have a lot of resource available thanks to the ramp. And you can play this on turn 1. So the advantage of this is obviously that it can make space then to play more stuff that other Bosk ramp deck don't play, like for example Jango Fett. And at the meantime, it does give him more space also, it also gives him more space to put like stuff that normally we wouldn't be able to play. Dengar, Toro, Kalikan's synergies here has been particularly relevant in his matchup. Has been particularly relevant, in the tournament. We've seen in the feature match area being used several times. I love the random copy of Timely Intervention. I think it's very good in a ramp deck when you have access to a lot of resources. So there's a lot of cool things in this deck. But I have a couple of criticisms. First of all, the curve is awful. He's basically playing like a million 3-drops, which he works pretty well. He has Bounty Hunter Quarries to get them out. He has Darth Vader to get them out. So it's not the end of the world, but I can see some hand being a little bit clunky because of that. He also plays like 6-7 drops, which I feel like is a lot. And then his super late game is not super strong. He's only playing 2 copies of Palpatine. He needs to play Reinforcement Walker because otherwise he has no heal against aggro. And then he has to not play Krayt Dragon, which in my opinion is just a massive, massive cost to not being able to play Krayt Dragon in a ramp red deck. So that's why he's not playing. So there's a lot of things that I like about it. There's a lot of things I don't like. It definitely inspires me to kind of rebuild my boss deck and see how it's going to work out. He decided also to play ECL, which I think is a very bold move against aggro, but as you can see, he's playing a lot of Sentinels. I think among the different black, red, green decks that we've seen, whether it's Vader or Bosk, it's probably one of the one that should be doing the best against aggro. And we've seen him doing quite well against aggro. I don't necessarily think aggro will be a good matchup, but at least it's going to be better than the traditional boss cramp deck, because he's very low to the ground. He has a lot of removals. He's playing a lot with the bounties, and the good thing is that aggro really have to be playing their turn 1 play on turn 1, and if they don't, you're very much guaranteed to be able to place your bounties early and start gashing out on this boss and get massive value. So we see the Great Dragon in the sideboard. He can turn his deck a little bit more rampy after sideboard thanks to resupply in the sideboard. And then we see Top Target. I'm a big fan of Top Target in Bosk. To be able to even though it's going to cost 3, if you can double trigger Top Target and heal 12, it's incredibly impactful. I've seen people, and myself included, I've changed my Bosk deck to be playing the client, out of aspect client, which can be pulled out of Bounty Hunter Quarry and be pulled out of Vader. That's why I like it a bit better than Top Target, but I think both cards are equally potent and really compensate one of the big weaknesses of Bosk, which is the lack of healing, of significant healing. And here, of course, healing 12 with one card is absolutely disgusting if you can pull that off. But usually you can, because Bosk is not really going to be something that the aggro players can necessarily kill very quickly, unless it decides to go ECL Po on it. Very interesting deck, and congratulations for number 4 place, Matt. Number 3, we got Oliver Symonds playing the solo green deck. So this is basically the Swarm new Han Solo deck that has been popularized by the Swoop Racers. Check out their YouTube channel. They do really good high-level content. They're some of the best players in Poland, in my opinion. Poland being, of course, extremely active on Star Wars Unlimited. And this deck is very similar to what they've been working on. So glad to see this deck performing well, because even though it's behaved very similarly, as I can see, it's playing a lot of similar cards than the traditional Sabine Green, but it does behave quite differently. It doesn't play for a cause I believe in. It doesn't have the reach to get those damage in and just finish the game off using 4 cause I believe in. It's a much more board base. Really try to swarm the board with threats. It's not trying to arena dodge you. It's just going full on the ground, completely overwhelm the board by playing multiple units using Han Solo's ability. Use Akbar to get rid of the opponent unit. Abuse Mas Kanata to give a lot of experience token. Red 3 makes everybody just a super big threat, and you completely overwhelm the board with this. And then, of course, your top curve is going to be the traditional Poe, Wrecker, Guerrilla attack pod, which is very good with Han Solo as it comes to play as a 6/4. 6/4 that can attack right away is just extremely scary. So, yeah, it's a pretty cool deck. It's a pretty cool deck. And if you want to play, if you already own a Sabine green deck and you want to try something a little bit different, this is the deck is once you get your Podam run, which you probably have if you're playing Sabine green, then you don't have to buy any expensive card. It's very easy to transition from Sabine green to Han green and have a different experience. So very cool deck, and glad that this deck is taking the 3rd place of the tournament. And then we got Mark Fairbrother, who also has his own YouTube channel. I think it's called Star Unlimited Power, Star Wars Unlimited Power, if I'm not mistaken. He already made his own video about the tournament, by the way, and he come out second here with a Sabine Grain. His deck is, as you can see, pretty traditional. The only thing that I personally disagree with in his version of the deck is the lack of R2, is the fact that he's playing R2D2. I'm not a big fan of R2D2 in Sabine, personally. I find its openings when you go turn 1 R2D2. If I'm the opponent, I feel very, very good about this. When your opponent is basically very low on 2 drops, so he's basically only playing Battlefield Marine, Green Squadrons, and Sabine. So very often he's going to be forced, relatively often he's going to be forced to go R2D2 turn 1. And R2D2 turn 1 is really not a great opening. If you can use R2D2 as a way to kind of like fill the gap in your curve by playing like turn 2, turn 3, like Fleet Lieutenants and then playing R2D2, then R2D2 becomes really good. But if you are playing this as like a turn 1 play, it feels terrible. And even 12 2 drops, I found it to be not the best for Sabine. I prefer to play I personally play 14 turn 1 play for Sabine for maximum consistency. Then the Metal Ceremony making it to the deck, despite the fact that we are playing fewer rebels than we used to because of Bow and Wrecker. As I said, not a massive fan of the card. I definitely not a fan of playing 3 of them. I found the card to be quite situational. It's obviously that situation where it's amazing, situation when it's not so great. See, once again, 3 copies of Dark Sabers. I also think it's too many, but that's what he decides to go for. 3 Dark Sabers, and then the Heroic Sacrifice. Something I want to notice is Heroic Resolve has not seen play out of the 3 Sabine Green list that we've seen. And I found this to be relatively surprising because I'm a really big fan of Heroic Resolve. I think it's really an amazing card. So a bit surprised by that. And once again, Timely Intervention, which it's been working pretty well on those kind of longer, grindy games to kind of give, once again, the ability for Wrecker and Poe to be ambushable. The sideboard is also interesting. He has a lot of anti-aggro cards. General Dodonna, Bright Hope is very good against aggro. And Rebel Assault is very good against. So there's basically 9 cards against aggro in the sideboard. Even Mace Window to some extent is more than... Now, Mace Window is probably too slow for aggro matchup. I don't exactly know what the Mace Window is for. It'd be interesting to ask him in which matchup he is siding in the Mace Window. Mace Window is a card that I used to consider in Sabine Green that was back in Spark of Rebellion, because it's effectively a card that comes to play, kills something, and then untaps, so it can attack the base right away after. But just 7 is just a little bit too expensive for Sabine, especially if you're playing Wrecker and you're going to take out your resources. But overall, the deck is pretty classic, and Sabine Green is a very strong deck, so it's not a surprise to see him and to see it on the high table. And Mark basically was undefeated up to the point where he actually he played against Luke, I believe, and no, was it against Luke? Was it? No, he played against Matt. Sorry, and he basically had a turn 1 where he had nothing to play, and a turn 2 where he had almost nothing to play, just for a cause, I believe in. So one of the most horrible hands. So he could have gone undefeated, I think, if he didn't lose that last, if he didn't had this horrible opening hand. Anyway, and on first position we got Mitchell Tweed with this Kira Green, and the only Kira Green in the top 16, which is to be a little bit surprising, even though, as I said, Kira has a relatively low attendance. So what can we say about this deck? Well, it's not really much to say. It's very similar to the deck that Wu was playing, that he won the day 2 of Gen Con with. It was also undefeated Gen Con on day 2 with this very similar deck. It's the version that plays ECL, does not play any Rival's Fall, plays the Fail the Dragon instead. This is what I'm saying, guys. Boba players, take notes. If this becomes a trend, just put some Boba Fett's armor in. Like, what can this deck do against Boba Fett's armor, guys? Like, Avenger does not target leaders. The Devastator, even the Devastator doesn't kill a Boba Fett with Boba Fett's armor. Then it's gonna be so he has to go super Laser Blast, or hope that he can put a Power of the Dark Side to get rid of it. So good luck with that. Obviously Rook doesn't work either. It's this deck literally cannot beat a Boba Fett with Boba Fett's armor. Like, it's gonna be a huge struggle for this deck to. He's gonna have to use multiple cards. There's no other way. Anyway, that's interesting. But as I said, the rest of the deck is pretty classic. This deck is incredibly good in my opinion because it's I think it's quite good against aggro because it has a lot of early game sentinels with Spike Sentinels. Once you give those Spike Sentinels shield, they become so annoying to deal with. It has of course like enforcers that can, once again boosted by Kira, can become very annoying. So those cards are really good at contesting the ground arena early on. Then it has cheap and effective removals. It has tons of way to win life with Vigilance, the client, in the main deck. And obviously ways to completely come back into the game with Overwhelm Barrage. And ways to lock out the game completely using Snoke, Avenger, Devastator, that kind of thing. really lock the late game. So it's a deck that is going to do well against Boba, because Boba mid range. This deck is more controlly, so Boba is not really fast enough to kill Kira before Kira comes online, and when Kira comes online, it completely takes over the game with superior cards. Currently, this deck, I think the biggest weakness of this deck is probably going to be hard control decks, but currently hard control decks have difficulties making it through the meta. They have difficulties to play in the meta. They just haven't been able to be super successful. So maybe there's room here for Kira Green to be there. So if another thing interesting about this deck is so why does Kira is better than Krennic in my opinion? So at least in the current meta, there's a lot of units that are very very big with a lot of health. Typically, obviously, Podamron, Wrecker, Boba Fett and Zuckuss are like the biggest ones. And obviously, if you're going to be running in the mirror, there's going to be, of course, Vader, Maul, like all those kind of high health units. And Kira is currently a main deck kind of way to answer those very big threats. You cannot really do that. You cannot really do that with Krennic. Krennic is not good at dealing with those very large threats. Krennic really pays off when the opponent cannot really deal with him and he just attacks every turn and heal. But in the current meta, there are just so many ways to one-shot a leader that has 7 health. Before, the only really way to do this was to basically play like Steadfast Battalion. Now we have access to Rival's Fall. Now we have access to Poe Dameron, Wrecker, Maul. So many ways to one-shot 7 health leaders without even needing the leaders to be in play. Steadfast Battalion required a bit of a setup. Now there's so many ways to deal with Krennic without even requiring that setup. So Krennic is just so much easier to deal with than it used to by a lot. And I think that for that reason, Krennic is a bit weaker. Krennic's ability passive is very good, but so is Kira. I think Kira's passive ability is also extremely good. So overall, I think Kira is better than Krennic. At the moment, I was a little bit unsure about this early on in the game when people were saying Kira is the best leader for that shell. I was a bit more kind of like want to wait and see. I was also not really playing that kind of deck very much, so I didn't have really a strong opinion about this. But now I can clearly agree that yes, Kira is definitely the best leader for that shell. And I actually thought that even before that tournament. This is not the tournament that changed my mind. What changed my mind was simply just playing the deck recently. And definitely Kira is the real deal. Even though of course it's very meta dependent, right? I can definitely see a meta where Krennic would be better, but for the time being, Kira is really the best option. So a bit of closing thoughts here. So congratulations, of course, to Mitchell for taking 7-0 win on this tournament here, being undefeated and taking the 400 pounds, I believe that he won from that tournament. So 400 pounds cash that he got from that tournament, which is pretty great to see that in a game like Star Wars Unlimited. Moving on now to kind of closing thoughts on the tournament. So the meta seems quite stable since Gen Con. We haven't seen any major innovations in regards to the metagame. Out Control still struggles to break through. Something that I didn't mention, but we've seen the Zines basically disappearing from the Boba Fett's list. I wonder if Out Control has. The problem is like Out Control. Out Control got a lot of new tools with that expansion, but there's also been so many cards that do very well against Out Control. Mostly talking about, of course, in generally speaking, the Smuggle's very strong against Out Control. Out Control is aggro is a lot better against Out Control than it used to. Notably thanks to Smuggle. There's also so many very strong cards against Control, like TIE Phantom, Bazine we talked about earlier. Body Rook now sees a lot more play than he used to. The tech, the DJ combo is extremely strong against out control. So there's a lot of tool against control, and that's I think is a big explanation of why the deck is kind of struggling. So as long as people are gonna be playing hold hand yellow or hold hand green, it's gonna be difficult for hard control to see play. That's kind of my opinion. That's probably the reason why it's struggling a lot, even though it has probably a great matchup against it has a great matchup against Kira, and it has a great matchup against Boba, in my opinion. Young Han Blue is better than Ray Red. This is something that I already knew, but it's kind of this tournament is once again the confirmation. We see no Ray Red in the top 16, despite Ray Red being quite represented in this tournament. And we see Young Han Blue, 3 Young Han Blue in top 16. Kira is better than Krennic. I already talked about this. I already, once again, I knew this before this tournament, but it's once again kind of a confirmation. 0 Krennic being played in this tournament, and Kira taking the win. And Boba Yellow also seems to be the best version of Boba. We've seen Boba Yellow, the tempo, Boba Green with the newest cards, Boba Red with the full space, which hasn't broke through the top 16. This deck is still kind of, it's a very cheesy deck. I'm really glad that this deck is not as good that good as we thought it was. And it seems to be not doing so well in tournaments, and I'm really glad it's not, because it's such an awful deck to play against. It's basically aggro, but aggro that is trying to not be interactive at all. So I'm really glad this deck is not seeing play. And Boba Blue, I think it's a very strong deck, but seems to the meta doesn't seem to be favorable to it at the moment, at least. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for those who watched the tournament live. It was great to see everybody's been wonderful in the chat. I didn't need to do any moderation whatsoever. That was great. I hope you enjoyed it. It was my first time casting a tournament by myself. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. And right now I'm still very busy because I've moved to a new house, as you can see here on my background. I'm basically moved into a new house, so I'm extremely busy. I don't have time to do any sort of coaching, and even on the videos, I do fewer videos than I used to. Don't worry about it. This is only temporary. I'm going to get back into full force as soon as I get a bit more comfortable in my new environment. I didn't have any hot water until yesterday, so a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on the house, and as soon as I'm feeling more comfortable, I will definitely be dropping more videos. Already casting that tournament, on Sunday was extremely bold, to say the least, with the amount of stuff I had to do. But I didn't want it to miss this. I really enjoy casting tournaments, and I definitely hope I will do more of them. Thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time.